People who have like, I say, knee-jerk reactions to hearing that, we're working on aging or we're trying to do something about aging. They think, oh, why are you messing with something that's natural? But of course, when you translate this into, well, we're trying to eradicate Alzheimer's, or trying to eradicate cancer, would you support, curing cancer? Everybody's like, yes. Would you support curing Alzheimer's? Everybody's like, yes. Would you support curing aging, which is the root cause of all these things? And they're like, no. And they're like, why not? This is a bit of a contradiction, right? Because if you support eradicating all the diseases, why not support eradicating the root cause of it? And I think it's just, this goes back to people's, predisposition to thinking that aging is just something that we can't do anything about. So people kind of made peace with it. And when you start questioning this, people have a hard time letting go, and they invent all these justifications why aging and dying is actually a good thing, which I can't really understand why that would be the case. My name is Yuri Deigin. I'm the co-founder and CEO of YouthBio Therapeutics, where we're developing rejuvenating gene therapies, in particular for brain diseases and like Alzheimer's and others. My grandma, she passed away from Alzheimer's. That got me interested in the disease, and also got me interested in the kind of genetic predisposition to Alzheimer's. And then I did a 23andMe test, and I discovered that I carry like 2 copies of this ApoE4 gene, which predispose you to a much higher risk of Alzheimer's, like 20 times greater risk of Alzheimer's than people who don't have like this ApoE4 variant. So that got me really interested in working on Alzheimer's drug development, and that's where I started my drug development journey. And interestingly enough, that kind of led me to aging and longevity, because during my initial work in Alzheimer's, I came to the realization that aging is the driving force behind Alzheimer's, neurodegeneration, and so many other diseases like cancer and heart disease, etc. And then ultimately, I started working on longevity therapy, a therapy that's meant to go after the root cause of these diseases, to go after aging. And ultimately, that kind of led me full circle, as now we work on Alzheimer's as the kind of first disease that we're targeting with our rejuvenating gene therapy. So the field of longevity is really trying to figure out a way to allow people to remain as healthy as they want for as long as they want. Because right now, with the diseases of aging, we're hostages of our biology, and we can't control what happens to us. What, as a field, we'd like to do is kind of reduce the sum total of human suffering, because these diseases of aging, they lead to so much human suffering, especially in the last few years of our lives, that people are not enjoying at all. And so we just want to be able to just prevent all those diseases from occurring in the first place, and so save people from all that suffering that they have to endure. And ultimately, medicine will be about preventing all the bad things that can occur, including aging itself. Of course, ultimate goal is to allow people to remain as healthy for as long as they want, and the interim goal is to extend the healthy years of people's lives, kind of making 90 the new 50 for now. But ultimately, of course, making sure that everything is the new 25. People are as healthy as they want to be, and 25 is kind of the peak health of people these days. And so the ultimate therapy will be able to bring back your state of health to that level. And of course, right now it sounds like science fiction. Can you really take an 85-year-old and bring it back to 25-year-old? That will still remains to be seen. But if we're able to slow down the aging process, if we kind of stop the aging process at that level, then it doesn't matter when they reach the chronological age of 85, their health will remain as 25. And so that's the ultimate goal of the longevity field. One way we think we can reach this ultimate goal is with epigenetic rejuvenation and epigenetic modulation of aging at the level of our cells. Right now, one of the approaches that we're pursuing at YouthBio and some other companies is called partial reprogramming, where we use the power of full cellular reprogramming to rejuvenate cells, but we only allow the reprogramming process to proceed for short durations. That's the partial part of it. And so with that, we try to shift the gene expression pattern of the underlying cells to a more youthful pattern. And in many experiments, that was shown to have rejuvenating effects, to have positive therapeutic effects. And so the first steps on the way to these therapies to slow down aging involve using the process of partial reprogramming to bring back cells to a more youthful state. And I think one way that we can achieve this ultimate goal is to go at this level of epigenetics in our cells, which means just control of gene expressions, because all of our cells have the same DNA, but we have like 200 different types of cells, and so we need control mechanisms for activating which genes are silent and which genes are not silent in a given cell type. And this whole concept is called epigenetics, basically control of the expression of the genes in our cells. And also this gene expression pattern, it changes with our age. And the underlying hypothesis behind the therapies that we're developing is that we can actually shift the pattern of gene expression of these cells from an older pattern to a more younger pattern. And this is the concept of epigenetic rejuvenation of these cells. So to say just a few more words about reprogramming, which in itself is a groundbreaking discovery, and it got a fully deserved Nobel Prize for it in 2012, is this observation that we can take any cell of like terminally differentiated cell, like a skin cell or a brain cell, and turn it back into embryonic stem cell, which was a novel discovery that people were surprised by, because before then people thought that actually this process of differentiation is irreversible. Because when we start as an embryo, like a single fertilized cell, which develops these embryonic stem cells, out of which all of our cells in our body eventually derive. And so people thought that was a one-way process, that you can only go into the direction of a skin cell, but you cannot go back in the direction of this embryonic stem cell. And then Yamanaka proved them wrong by finding these 4 factors that are now called Yamanaka factors that actually take any cell all the way back to this ground zero of development, these embryonic pluripotent stem cells. And this discovery was, of course, very unexpected. And even more beneficial discovery for us as a field of longevity was that in this process of reprogramming, all of these cells that go back to this ground state are also physiologically rejuvenated. Their hallmarks of aging are ameliorated, and the cells then emerge essentially as young cells. So you take an old skin cell, reprogram it back to this pluripotent state, and then you reprogram it again into a skin cell, and it's a young skin cell. So you take an old skin cell and it becomes young. And this power of the reprogramming process to rejuvenate cells is what eventually led to this whole field of partial reprogramming. And there's now like a dozen companies working on this, where we're trying to harness this rejuvenating power of reprogramming, but without this whole full identity changing aspect of it. And that's why it's called partial reprogramming. The partial aspect being we want just rejuvenation, but we don't want our cells to actually change. We want the skin cell to remain a skin cell, brain cell to remain a brain cell, but we want it to get younger. So that's the idea behind partial reprogramming. And why do we need to use partial reprogramming is because, of course, full reprogramming is great when you're talking about like cells in a petri dish, but if we're trying to harness this power for ourselves, our already formed bodies, we can't afford those cells to go through this pluripotent state, because that will mean those cells will stop doing their function, like a skin cell will stop being a skin cell, or a liver cell will stop doing its job filtering blood, and you got a liver failure and you're going to die. And so we have to be very careful with this partial reprogramming process, where we only allow cells to reprogram just enough to get younger or rejuvenated, or at least from an epigenetic standpoint, rejuvenated, but not yet change their identity. So we want them to remain the same cell type as they start as, and also they keep doing their work. Because, of course, for ourselves to be rejuvenated, it's like kind of fixing a car while it's still driving, like we can't afford to like pause it, take it apart and like reprogram some of the parts and then reprogram them back. We have to be doing it while our body is still doing all of the things that it needs to do to keep us alive. And this also probably even more important in the context of the brain. If we're trying to rejuvenate our brain, we have to be very careful not to mess up some of its functions. And that's why we have to be very precise in the reprogramming process, that we only get the first initial stages of it that rejuvenate things, but don't then proceed further to kind of mess up with the function of the cells as they do the job they need to be doing. The entire field of partial reprogramming was essentially started by this paper that came out in 2016 by Alejandro Ocampo and others out of the Salk Institute under the group of Juan Carlos Espiso Belmonte, which was the first paper that demonstrated that reprogramming can actually be used in vivo in the context of already formed organism with beneficial results. Because before that, people tried to use the Yamanaka factors in animals and to see, can we harness this rejuvenating potential of reprogramming in the context of animals, and they failed. But what they haven't yet appreciated is that actually if you use reprogramming for only short duration, and this is where partial comes from, this is essentially the genius of Ocampo and his co-authors, is that they showed that even short duration of reprogramming can produce positive benefits, can produce rejuvenation, and can produce lifespan extension. And that's what became known as partial reprogramming. And after that, initially people were skeptical, and I think I was one of the first people who wasn't skeptical, and I founded the first company based on kind of this paradigm to be translated into therapies, because I thought it has such high potential because it works at the level of epigenetics. It rejuvenates cell at the level at which I think aging is actually progressing, or a key driver of aging is epigenetics. And so when I founded my first company in 2017 that was geared towards translating this paradigm, I was pretty much, in a very lonely field, because a lot of the others were very skeptical of this approach, including investors who thought it's kind of sounds too good to be true. But fast forward a few years, and investors like Yuri Milner and Jeff Bezos with Altos Labs entering the field with $3 billion, they kind of then gave the field momentum and credibility that, okay, this is not too good to be true. This is actually true. This is working. That we now have like over a dozen different papers showing the benefits of partial reprogramming, rejuvenating benefits, therapeutic benefits. And so by now, the field kind of has not only emerged, I think it kind of is now at the peak of the hype cycle. I think for me, a lot of things clicked. Why I wasn't skeptical, because as I said, even before I read the Ocampo paper, I already came to the belief that aging proceeds epigenetically. And so we need some mechanism that can roll back epigenetics to a more youthful level in the cells. I just didn't know what mechanism could do that. But when I saw the Ocampo paper, it was like, duh, reprogramming. Reprogramming is what epigenetically takes the cells all the way to this ground state of development, this embryonic stem cell. And of course, with that, not only does it take it to the ground state epigenetically, it also takes them physiologically, rejuvenates them. And so all of these things were fitting like a puzzle, at least in my mind. I was convinced that yes, reprogramming process, obviously it can rejuvenate cells in a petri dish, full reprogramming. It's highly plausible then that if we use it partially, we can already get some measure of rejuvenation with this process already in vivo. Now we need to start working on actually making it practical, turning it into therapies that we can use and get on the market in the next 10 years. Because we can, of course, study these things in the lab, but until we actually start translating them into therapies, none of our parents or children will be able to use it until like 10 years after we start. And so there's always like already being in drug development and knowing how long things take to get from the lab to the clinic. I was very kind of impatient to start doing it as quickly as possible. And I was very disappointed to see that nobody else is doing that. And so one of my goals in starting the first company to translate that in 2017 was to maybe get other people to notice it and think, okay, maybe that's not such a crazy idea. Maybe I should also do that. And thankfully, like within a year or two of me starting the first company, there was David Sinclair with his company, there was Turn Bio with their company out of Stanford. In a sense, I at least accomplished that mission, that there were now companies working on this paradigm. I think that was also the first domino that eventually led to like Altos Labs and their $3 billion, and now like over a dozen companies pursuing partial reprogramming and making it kind of the biggest area in longevity research that there is. The reason why we picked Alzheimer's is that there is a strong epigenetic component to the onset of Alzheimer's symptoms, where basically neurons at the level of gene expression start working worse and worse. And so our goal is to correct that at the level of gene expression, or at the level of epigenetics, basically control of gene expression, with our Yamanaka factors or partial reprogramming factors, where they can bring back the pattern of gene expression in the cells to a more youthful level or a better functioning level. And so right now, the neurons that are affected by Alzheimer's, they eventually die, but of course before they die, they just stop doing their job worse and worse. And so our initial goal is to get them back to a level where they're doing a better job than otherwise without our therapy. And also there is another study that we saw that some of the Alzheimer's symptoms could even be reversible, epigenetically reversible. With that, we're hopeful that maybe some neurons that we think are dead, they're not necessarily dead, they just stopped working. But if we're able to correct their gene expression pattern with our intervention, with our Yamanaka factors, bringing them back to a more youthful or better functioning level, that will reverse the Alzheimer's symptoms in our patients. And so this is the mechanism by which we expect our therapy to be beneficial in the context of Alzheimer's. And so the way we do this is by delivering these rejuvenating genes or Yamanaka genes into the neurons of our patients, where these rejuvenating genes, when they're activated, they start remodeling the epigenetic and transcriptomic landscape of the cell and bring a shift the gene expression pattern to a more youthful pattern or a better functioning pattern. And so our vector containing these Yamanaka genes gets into those cells, and it stays silent until the patient takes a pill that activates those genes. And so when patients take this pill for like 2 or 3 days at a time, they activate those genes inside the neurons that we target, and those neurons are shifted to a better functioning state. Patients can then do, with some periodicity, take in this pill on a periodic basis and rejuvenate or improve the functioning of the neurons on a periodic basis as well. I'm hopeful that within 5 years, we'll see some therapies, partial reprogramming therapies, already start undergoing clinical trials, including hopefully ours in Alzheimer's, and hopefully even maybe getting some initial approvals in the next 5 to 6 years. If everything goes well, I think there's good potential that some partial reprogramming therapies could be already entering the market. In the next 10 to 15 years, I expect there to be dozens of therapies already on the market for targeting different organs, and then people starting to combine them to get systemic effects, if not rejuvenation, then at least slowing down of aging, prevention of multiple diseases, and essentially prevention of aging itself. And within 20 to 30 years, I'm expecting to emerge even better rejuvenating factors, because so far I've only been talking about Yamanaka factors. But of course, the race is on in the field to find better factors, factors that are rejuvenating and yet don't have the risks associated with Yamanaka factors, the risks of changing cells from one type to another. And I think within the next 3 to 4 years, such factors will be found. And so within 15 to 20 years, they'll become therapies. And so, within like 30 years, I think we'll have very strong systemic therapies that will already start definitely slowing aging down and maybe even reversing some aspects of aging and getting us well to that path of eventually allowing us to have aging under full control.